The Dai-ichi Life Derby collection is a collection of 6 volumes of drawings, and in all there are 745 drawings across the 6 volumes. The drawings are of birds and botanical drawings, a number of fish drawings. There's a small number, half a dozen perhaps, drawings of mammals and a single scene of Norfolk Island. Elmer Burke Lambert was the person who actually compiled this collection. He was a natural historian. He was a person quite like Sir Joseph Banks in that he was independently wealthy, had a passionate interest in botany and in natural history, and had the wealth to pursue that interest. But because he was so well known and so highly regarded, so obsessive, people just gave him collections too. People just returning from Australia, wondering about how to publish their collections. The person they would come to often would be Elmer Burke Lambert to help them achieve that. He died in 1842 without any children, and he died quite debt-ridden. The 13th Earl of Derby was a great friend of Lambert's and had a particular interest in the fate of Lambert's collection. And he bought Lambert's 6 volumes of Australian drawings. And because these drawings have essentially sat in an aristocratic library for over 150 years and rarely been opened, the freshness and the brightness, the vibrancy of the colours was really quite obvious. They still felt so fresh and new and barely touched, which in effect they were barely touched. The first 3 volumes are largely copied from the iconic Watling collection, the collection of drawings assembled by John White, and many of them created by the convict Thomas Watling here in Sydney Cove. We thought that's basically what we were getting, but once we looked into the collection more deeply, we realised that we had 3 volumes that are virtually unknown. There's been very little research done on them. They're not mentioned in any of the historical literature. It was like a new find, uncovering a new little treasure trove of drawings. The people who were creating the drawings were, in the first instance, the surgeons, because they were looking at the medicinal properties or potential medicinal properties of plants. Even more than that, officers, naval officers drew. It was an essential skill, along with mathematics. And convicts who had drawing skills, either they were trained artists, quite often they were forgers, they had been convicted of forgery, or convicts who had been involved in allied professions, so printmakers or ceramics artists. So a matter of only a couple of weeks after the First Fleet arrived, people were already drawing what they saw and already recording that in journals and in letters. And the first wave of letters that left the colony in July 1788 were just replete with descriptions of natural history. And the number of people who mentioned enclosing drawings with their letters was quite high. Well, in an era that was pre-mechanical reproduction, so at the time of the First Fleet, the only means they had of documenting the natural history that they saw was to draw it. And then the only way they had to share those drawings was to copy their work. But when we say copies, we mean something quite different to forgeries. The copying was about dissemination. All of them are originals, and the drawings were treated as working documents, not as fine works of art in the way that we now tend to respond to them. And we have copying that we're now fairly confident was happening in Sydney Cove in the 1790s. And then those drawings, once they reached London, would then be copied again. So loss of detail is an indication of the order of drawings. So the first drawing in a sequence will usually identify by the amount of detail that it has. So some drawings include feather detail that is lost with later versions. Or you might see a drawing where a bird is reaching for an insect, and then in each later version the insect disappears. The tree that they're perched on, it gets less and less until it's just a floating stick in the air. A little bit like Chinese whispers, I suppose. Every time a story is retold, something's lost or something's added. Part of the difficulty that they had in creating the drawings of birds and fish was trying to draw them quite quickly before they moved or the fish lose their sheen and their colour. So they were often forced to draw from stuffed specimens or from skins. And if that taxidermy had been done inaccurately, the result would be a distorted drawing. And an excellent example of that in these collections is of the masked lapwing, which is quite a squat bird, but in most of the drawings that we have in this collection, it's a very elongated bird. You come to it with quite a lot of prior knowledge of other collections. So it's trying to then work out where and how this new collection, the Derby collection, slots in with all the drawings that we know about. So you start by just looking at the similarities and the differences and how often and where those similarities and differences occur. Then you start to look more closely at the materials themselves, and that's when you start to dovetail more closely with the work that the conservators are doing.
Conservators' work with a collection like the Derby collection won't tell you which drawing came first or which might be a copy of another drawing when they share the same image, but it can give you information that might help you place the drawing in time or in a location, such as was it drawn in Australia or was it drawn back in the United Kingdom. So the first set of techniques that a conservator would use for researching a collection like this are visual light techniques, where you look at an item with a light behind it and it can tell you things about the paper, the type of paper it is, what the watermark is, variations of density in the paper and things like that. There are thousands upon thousands of watermarks in existence, so when you find papers that have been formed on the same mould, it shows a connection between them that's quite significant. We've found exact matches of watermarks across the Derby collection and then much more well-provenanced collections at the State Library, which allows us to say that there's a possibility that some of the Derby volumes were drawn in colonial Australia. Another technique is ultraviolet light. So under ultraviolet light, certain pigments fluoresce in different colours. An example of this is lead white, which fluoresces pink. And lead white's quite a key pigment to identify, as it can discolour to black over time, giving people a false reading of an image because things that used to be white are now dark grey or black. I've also used microscopy to look at the minuscule details in the item. So very fine techniques used by the artists can be examined really well under a microscope, and it also reveals the layered structures used in some of the artist's techniques, so you can examine how they were painted.
We knew that an artist called George Raper had used metallic paints, and we knew that his drawings were done in the colony because he had been meticulous about signing and dating all of his drawings. There are metallic paints used in Derby's collection, and the Sydney Bird Painter collection has used quite a lot of what we now know is gold.
Another technique we have at the library is X-ray fluorescence spectrometry, which uses X-rays in a very targeted way to show you what elements are present. And this can be very useful for the identification of media, such as watercolour media, as it will tell us if, say, iron or copper or gold are present. Metallic media has been used twice in the Derby collection, in volumes 4 and volume 1. but it's also highlighted the use of metallic media across the library's natural history collections. So we've found gold and we've found brass, which is a copper zinc alloy, and we've found silver. But it's clear why they were using it in these drawings. It's been layered with watercolour to create iridescent effects in birds' feathers, and seeing these birds in real life, you really see that the feathers are iridescent and do have that luminescent quality.
The number of different handwritings that we see on almost all of the drawings, written by different people, they're a true indication of the drawings being used and treated and regarded as working documents. It was important with botanical and ornithological specimens that particular information would be recorded, so information about the habitat of birds or plants, the song or call of birds. And other annotations that we've seen on these drawings actually are firm attributions to artists. So Lambert has written on the back of some of his drawings who actually drew it and where they've received the drawings from. So for the first time we now have examples of drawings that were done by, for instance, William Patterson, who was a lieutenant with the Marines, who was desperately interested in natural history and desperately trying to be admitted into the Royal Society in London. He writes that he's done his own drawing, but we've never before this time, before the Lambert's collection, had direct examples of his drawings. I still feel excited by the collection, and I feel excited about it because I think we've gone a long way, but we haven't gone all the way. What they've unlocked for us now is a sequence of several hundred drawings that were unknown to history, they were unknown to art history. We don't know who produced them. So volume 4, for instance, contains dramatic examples of drawings of birds and fish. They aren't copied, they haven't been copied, and they haven't been seen before. But we do know with quite a degree of certainty now that they were produced in Sydney Cove in the 1790s. I think one of the most exciting things is that the drawings are a link to 1788. They're a direct link to the people who arrived. They're a direct link to the Indigenous people who watched all this happen. It was a far more culturally rich and expressive experience for many people, which changes the way we perceive ourselves as a nation and changes our perception of the foundation of Australia as a nation.